right, so thank you for joining us this morning. This event is one of the events organized by the Hariri Center for the Middle East at the Atlantic Council, and it's specifically being branded as an EgyptSource event. EgyptSource, for those of you who don't read it and don't follow it and don't get it, you should be. It is our blog on Egypt. It contains both our own analysis, whether it's written in-house, but more importantly, written by people that we reach out to who have in-depth knowledge and experience of Egypt on political, socioeconomic levels. And it also contains a news roundup of everything that is happening on any particular day. So it gives you the news and it gives you a context in which to understand it. So if you don't get it, please let us know and we'll make sure that you're on the list and that you get it every day. Now, this event was set up so that we could take a look. I mean, Egypt is being discussed in the news. It's being discussed every day. It's being discussed by everyone. But there tends to be a need or a desire or a tendency, if you like, to discuss Egypt as one sweeping motion, as some big hegemonous clump. And it isn't. Egypt is a large country. There's 90 million of us and counting. And it is complicated. So what we thought we would do is take a look at Egypt from various sources, from various people, various points of view, so that maybe take a look at what was happening. So we have 4 panelists with us today. We're lucky to have 2 with us here, and we're lucky to have 2 in Cairo. On my left is Sarah El-Sirgany, who is a journalist. She's currently an independent journalist, but she was the deputy editor of the Daily News Egypt. She has recently been noted by El Monitor as one of the 16 female journalists to watch in the Middle East. On my right is Mohammad Tolba, who is a Salafi activist and entrepreneur. And for those of you who follow Egypt on Twitter, you'll be familiar with all 4 of these names. Mohammad set up Salafyo Costa, which is a grassroots organization interested in civil society work. And in Cairo, we have on the left in blue, Mosaab El Shamy, who has just been named by The Guardian as one of the top 10 digital media personalities of the year. And I believe one of his photographs that we first selected here at EgyptSource was picked by Time magazine as one of the top 10 photographs of the year. And next to him we have Basil Dabh, and if you read about Egypt, then you know Basil's name. He's a writer and commentator, works mostly for the Daily News Egypt. So what we're going to do today is have our 2 writers here speak for 8 minutes and counting, all right, on 2 separate subjects, and then we will switch to Egypt, where each of them will answer a question, and then we will take questions from the audience. Okay, so we're going to start with Sarah.
Okay. Can you hear me all? Okay. Let me start by a number. It's 51%. That was a percentage given by Basira Center, which is an independent statistics center that collects information. And it said 50% would vote for Defense Minister Abdelfattah al-Sisi tomorrow if he ran for president. Just before I go on, let me explain to you how statistics work in Egypt. Whether you're government or whether you're independent, you cannot ask a question to a number of people in a statistical form unless you have government approval. So any question posed to the public is government controlled. And this would explain why the statistics is not 90%, 80%, 70%, it's 51%. And 45% are undecided. This goes to, and I think the 45% is much more important than the 51%, because it challenges the idea that there is a homogeneous idea that the public opinion are one and the same. This is what the media tells us. What we as journalists are required to find confirmation for in our work, that everyone thinks the same way, and we've seen it across in different regimes. If we start by the uprising in 2011, The main chant was Al-Sha'b yurid isqat al-nizam, which is the people want the fall of the regime. And since then, the word the people want has been appropriated by every political force. Everyone claims to be representing the people, has their rights, has the right to represent them, and speaks on their behalf. And we've seen it with the revolution itself, the revolutionary forces. We've seen it with the Muslim Brotherhood, and we've seen it also with the military council and different leaders. The idea is, if we go back to 2012, to the presidential election, everyone kept predicting about who was going to win, and all statistics, all polls were proven wrong. They weren't actually. The idea is that we all chose to ignore the fact that every poll said that most people are undecided. At least half of them are undecided. And this is what gets looked over, is the fact that we focus on the people that are decided and believe that they constitute the majority and that they are the people there. And the media hype helps in that. As a journalist, I go down to the street and I find people dancing, chanting, showing Sisi pictures. Before that, it was Morsi pictures. And it's where you are, where you could believe that this is who you are. This is what people think. This is what the majority thinks. And in a sense, it's the majority. This is the dominating voice in that place at that time. But even in that place, if you sit down and talk to the people, you'll find that it's different than what you might think. Just a couple of months ago, I was in Sisi's original, the place where he grew up. It's a neighborhood in Old Cairo. And his posters are everywhere. There is an office supporting his presidency. The campaign for calling for him to run for president started in that neighborhood. But it wasn't as crazy or as historical as some of the other places I've been to, where the support is, where you cannot even question people, where you cannot even answer the wrong question or risk your own life. Once you sit down with the people there and you find and you talk about their aspirations, why they support Sisi, how they expect his presidency to be, and what type of accountability they expect for him, you find a lot of information and hopes and aspirations that anyone can relate to. But that's usually ignored, because most of the time, myself, a lot of my colleagues are in the hysterical celebrations or in the clashes, where if you're covering, say, the aftermath of a bombing and there are supporters of the military, they risk that you risk your own life if you ask them, try to probe their questions. And sometimes I feel that we are bullied into asking certain questions rather than explaining more. And geographically, it's very difficult to expect that Egypt, like 90 million people, whether by sheer size or geography, are the same. I think Tolba will talk to you about this also, about how culturally, every place has a different cultural experience, different values, and by default, different opinions and different views and things. Just step outside of Cairo for a minute, and then you'll find yourself in a different atmosphere. First of all, the war of graffiti that you find in the capital are non-existent. The posters of Sisi versus Mohammed Morsi are there, but are not as in your face. Do not pose the type of conflict you see in the capital, where people in the capital define themselves by their viewpoints, by their political affiliation, where they stand and things. Just few, like maybe 30 or 40 kilometers away from the capital, in rural Giza, for example, it's much more relaxed, much more laid back, and sometimes the political questions and political conflict is not even relevant. When you talk to people, it's not the first thing they bring up. It's only there when you question them, when you try to probe that and get certain answers from them. But throughout an entire conversation, this might not even come up. And I've been to other villages and other places across Egypt where at time of the highest political conflict, at times of presidential elections, at protests, some of this didn't even matter, it didn't register to people. They see media and they would ignore the clash between protesters and police happening away from them and try to talk to you about their own concerns, about their own livelihoods, what they expect and what they want. And this would explain the 45% I talked about earlier, is that it's not that they're undecided or might boycott or not boycott, it's the fact they don't care, they're apathetic to it. And that would challenge the idea that everyone, I'm sure if any of you talk to the government, whether the current government or the one after, or the Morsi government, they claim to speak on behalf of the people. But the numbers, even the numbers consistently has proven otherwise, whether in the constitutional referendum in 2012, which registered 32% participation of registered voters, and then after that in the recent constitutional referendum, which had 38% of participation. That's even low. The other side is not politically engaged. They are indifferent to the process. I'll end with a story that I found to be like that challenged all my beliefs in everything. That was on August 17. That was 4 days after the dispersal of the pro-Morsi sit-ins. And the tension on the street was unprecedented, whether between police and civilians or between civilians and civilians. On that day in central Cairo, about 150 or 200 Morsi supporters were trapped in a mosque and surrounded by the police and also civilians. Those who tried to leave were beaten up by protesters. And it was very difficult for me to get a camera out in that place or get my entire crew to go out and even film, because even those the residents that welcomed media were wary of their other neighbors who did not at all and would beat up journalists. And a couple of my colleagues actually were beaten up. But on that day, I went to that place twice, once in the morning and once in the afternoon. In the morning, there was shooting, there were gunfire. But when I came back in the afternoon, it had calmed down. And although they were in the area, you could see some civilians waiting for any pro-Morsi protester to be beaten up. What they did was some of other residents of the same place basically held hands, provided a human corridor from the door of the mosque until to the metro station, and decided that against the hype around them, they're going to provide a safe exit for everyone inside. And I was talking to some of them, and they said, well, we told them they can exit the mosque safely, and we have to protect them from other people. And they actually used the mob mentality to encourage others, and they chanted, "Hanihmihum," we will protect them, we will get them out. And they managed to get whoever the police let out to the metro station, all the way to the metro station, safely. And that challenged my idea about mobs, about what civilians do, about how people decide to act against what the media would tell them to act, or how the society would tell them to act. And that was such an initiative of their own that they managed to enforce on the ground.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Before we move to Mohammad, I'm just going to point out, for those of you who aren't that familiar with EgyptSource, or for those who are, EgyptSource is curated and edited and driven by its editor, Associate Editor Nancy Masih, who's sitting over in the corner. So if you have any questions, again, or are not receiving it and wish to be on the list, please see Nancy. All right, thank you. Now, we're going to turn to Mohammad, who is maybe going to give us a quick idea of what civil society has been reduced to, or is the increasingly smaller area that civil society is having to play in. So, and in Egyptian, I'll let him do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to come to meet you at the Atlantic Council and enjoy the great sunny weather. Actually, 2 days back, I was wearing a T-shirt, and today I'm wearing, a full coat, which is, I need to prove to my wife that I'm in the same place, Yesterday, I decided to have my last Washington walk. So I decided after we left that I will go to have a walk. And then I started to look at the people and how diversified the people were and how, everything was different and everything has its own unique identity. But there was this fully integration. Everything was fully integrated. And that's the issue in Egypt, actually. We miss this integration issue. We are looking to the people in a one color, one move, one trend, which is not true. I do remember that I decided to calm down politically for a while after 2011, after the constitution, the first constitution, which is called the Ikhwan Constitution. I visited one of the villages in the south, As-Sa'id, which is a very poor place. And then I found people that, they lack the very basic services and needs. And in Cairo, the capital city, we were fighting for, that the language that the constitution was written with was so poor. We were challenging the quality of the Arabic language, and people were trying to survive, to get a very basic needs. Politics, in my own point of view, is about serving the society. And if politics is not going or willing to serve the society, so we should all leave politics aside. It doesn't make any sense that we speak, the elite talk in the capital city, in the parliament, and we decided to campaign, and then we don't represent the real people needs, which is a great challenge, I guess. For the past 3 years, I would say that we disappointed the people. We disappointed the majority. And speaking by numbers, like Sarah did, I would say that we have average of 40% of Egyptians are illiterate. They cannot read and write. Like 40% are under the poverty rate. And these are great numbers. And people might challenge these numbers, okay, it would be 30, it would be like 45, but again, these are great numbers. So at the 25th of Jan, the people needs were like very basic needs, and that's very fair, by the way. They need high quality of services in terms of education, in terms of health service, and I would say that the majority of the revolutionaries made fun of these demands. They needed the elite talk. They needed this, let's talk politics, let's talk constitution, and we had grabbed the people to battles that they are not concerned about. So I know that we might debate that, we have to have a constitution, then everything will be fine. I would say that according to reality, that doesn't make any sense. They don't care. They will follow the guy who would give a valid promise of a better life standard. They don't care about constitution, the president, or the parliament. We would say that, guys, we know better. The American style. We have our way. We know you have the key for your pain, which is let's follow the parliament, then the presidential elections, then the constitution. And again, the people decided to take these battles, and they followed us. And then the first, let's say, democratic parliament was freezed, or, they said, okay, it was not that democratic, let's play it again, and the constitution, we made it again, and the presidential, we made it again. So the people are fed up, actually. And again, the people are not ready to keep going to the streets. The streets is no more the way for a change. I can sit at this panel and say, very sad and horrible stories about the clashes and the people dying and so on, but I'm not sure that this is the right thing to say. We need some light at the end of the tunnel. Yes, we had high hopes. We needed a complete change. We didn't get these changes, but I guess that we had achieved few things. We are on the way for the people empowerment. And when I say the people empowerment, I don't speak about those people who are lucky enough to take an international education, have the accent, the American accent, or British education, and so on. When I say people empowerment, I speak about those majorities, those people suffering, the real ones, the real needs. We should not by any means enforce our own ideologies or enforce our own, lifestyles on others, on the majority, the sufferings. We should try to translate these pains into, into constitutional terms, into help them speak out. We have here Kent. Kent had joined us in one of those convoys we do in these very poor neighborhoods. We take researchers to have on-field studies, to see the real people, to see the real demands, and stop, when you come to Cairo, usually you will stay in Zamalek, you will stay in, Maadi, whatever, which is not Cairo and which is not Egypt. It's time for us to be brave enough and to face the realities. It's time to try to translate this, slogans and chants into some real needs, some real deeds. It's time to help those people stop these sufferings. It's not the parliament, it's not the presidential elections, and it's not the constitution. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so just after that, I think for the majority of us, it's good to have people to listen to, and it's important to have someone there that you can talk to and ask questions of. But for the majority of us, I think our news from Egypt is gleaned through the press, the media, social media, and the press is becoming something of a delicate subject in Egypt. So I'm going to let someone who knows better speak about it. We have two journalists, and I'm going to start with Mosaab. And Mosaab, as a photojournalist, I just wanted to ask, what are the challenges of being a photojournalist in Egypt at the moment?
Okay. Can you hear me, first of all?
We can hear you perfectly.
Yeah.
Okay, I can't hear you, but okay. The challenges when it comes to photojournalism, and this is a question I kind of get asked a lot, and I always feel like maybe I'm not the person to answer this, because at the end of the day, there are other photojournalists who are by far better, more experienced, and who have faced even higher risks, who have been working in Egypt for decades. But I always look at photojournalism regarding my own experience, which is just a 3-year long experience so far. And this short journey or experience has actually had its ups and downs, and just as Sarah and Mohammed were describing how things have changed over the past 3 years, it has also changed for the media in general. But I will be more specific to talk about how photojournalists have had this impact. Throughout the changes and the different regimes, or one regime basically, that have been exchanging places, it's a bit, I think it's accurate to say that none of them have really had much concern about the freedom of media or press. It's all just been a matter of which one hasn't had as much power to crack down on those freedoms. It's no news that the biggest change to the freedom of media and photojournalism has been the biggest after June 30th. And that is for a few reasons, but it has mostly been having to do with the levels of violence on the street, and that has been, as a photojournalist, the biggest concern and the biggest risk at the moment, because just in 2013 and the second half of it, after Morsi's overthrow, the statistics, which are always very easy to simplify an event, have shown dramatic rise when it comes to a number of casualties in journalists, number of detainees, and injuries, and levels of violence. That has been the biggest change when I come to think of how things have changed over the past 3 years. There has been at least five photojournalists who have been killed since that period, mostly independent photojournalists. At the moment, there are also two independent photographers, Mahmoud Abu Zaid and Farid Qutb, who have been imprisoned since August and September, respectively. And this all builds up to why photojournalism in Egypt is under a huge threat. I mean, there is a WhatsApp conversation that includes all photojournalists in Egypt, and it's very useful for journalists to know where to go, what's happening, and people stay in touch with each other. It's very useful. But last Friday, the head of the group asked all photojournalists to go home. And this hasn't happened almost in forever, but that was very telling because 4 photojournalists were arrested last Friday, and this is no new, but it's becoming more difficult for. I mean, they usually get released if you have the proper accreditation with you, but even this is becoming a bigger risk. It sometimes takes up to 6 hours just to sort something like this, including one who was just arrested because he was wearing a helmet. And this is exactly why things are this is very bad news for the media in general, but for the journalists especially. And I will let Basil speak about the challenges when it comes to reporters and writers and channels, but what's specific about for the journalists is that they have to be there, and they have to be not just there, but at the very front of what is happening. And this is why the highest casualties tend to be among photojournalists. They tend to be whether it's through injuries, whether it's through detention, and sometimes death. January 25th, the last anniversary of the revolution. 2 months ago, saw the highest levels of arrests and injuries right after Rabaa massacre on August. There was at least 2 photojournalists who were killed that day, and at least 10 others were arrested. And this becomes the story of every photojournalist's life, is that in the build-up to big events like January 25, like maybe the 19th of March tomorrow, like other big events that get planned, that commemorate past events, photojournalists always have to, brace for all kinds of arrests and level of violence. I think it's very important to also note that the challenges are not always, limited to violence from the state or the government or the security forces, and this is what makes it, this is what makes the violence sort of three-dimensional, because it's just not coming from one side, but the very group you're embedding with are also becoming a very high source of violence. If you get spared by the police and the citizens with the police, you are very likely to become targeted by the protesters themselves. So it has become almost a usual ritual for journalists on Friday, for the journalists to either have their cameras broken or get detained by the police, or unfortunately, receive an injury. And this has to do, of course, with the level of violence on the street and the state of tension even among the normal citizens. who are even becoming, more alienated against photojournalists and always have suspicion towards anyone with a camera or wearing a helmet or a big bag. And this is all part of the very bleak image, unfortunately, when it comes to press image. I think it's always difficult to. It's easy to say things are always going to be bad, but the problem here is that we face bigger risks of things actually getting very, very bad for photojournalists to an extent where people stop seeing this complete image. As this level of violence increases, more journalists are shying away from going every Friday to cover the protest, because not only is there the violence I have mentioned, but there is a sense that Egypt is no longer being, a big story. So at the end of the day, you risk your life for a story that might not even make it to the second or third page in international newspapers, and eventually, we could see this case apply to other. Just like other countries which sort of went under the rug and slightly people stopped caring about. And this largely had to do with there were no more pictures and there was no more accurate reporting. So this is pretty much the state. Sorry for being so not positive about this, but it's unfortunately something has to be done about this, or things are going to become even more messy.
Thank you. Mosaab, can you hear me? No, it says, Mosaab, can you hear me? Yes, but his mic is off. Okay, so.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Great, thanks. So I have a very quick question for you. With the increasing risk in what is already a very high-risk profession, why do you continue to do it? Okay, I can't hear. You didn't hear me?
I think there are many. Sorry, I can't hear you.
All right.
Should I go on?
Yes, please.
Yes. Okay. Yes. I think this has to do with the reason I sort of became a photojournalist. Almost everyone in this panel, was there on. I think everyone in this panel was there on January 25th, and we sort of knew each other either through that or afterwards, and that's no different to me. And I was there like many others, but I was there with a camera as well. I was, I decided that I wanted to take pictures of what is going to happen that day, and I would like to keep these pictures to myself. So I did that, and I did that afterwards, in the next weeks and months. And gradually I started sharing these pictures with friends and with followers and on different social media. And when I ask myself why I'm doing this, I think it has to do with me wanting to really understand more. I remember sometimes protests that I went to without a camera, and other events when I was there with a camera. And the main difference is I have a much more, vivid memory of everything that happened there. I have a clearer understanding, and this, I think, continues to push me to do this, because I have, first and foremost, it's a personal, this is the personal reason behind it, is that I want to, have a better understanding, and somehow photographing these events do, increase a lot of awareness and adds other dimensions into the normal memory. I think now that obviously there are more risks, and it would be insane for everyone not to take risks, or at least, you know, weigh things more. The reason I continue to do this, even though unfortunately it has become a bit less due to the many risks, is because the state of media in Egypt at the moment is in a very sad state, and it has, and you know, it's very easy to see local reporters really risk their lives and end up having their picture against a very bold headline, which has nothing to do with journalism, unfortunately. And this is always, you know, sort of a motivation for me, because I get the chance to take pictures and dictate you know, the news in a way. I don't have an editor to add this headline next to my picture, or add a caption, which you know is very. It happens a lot in Egypt, in local newspapers. For example, on January 25th, again, there was a Colombian photojournalist who was arrested, and there was a picture of him being pulled away by police, and the caption was "Members of the Terrorist Brotherhood being arrested." So this is the problem in the sense that, you know, there are people everywhere in Egypt, especially local photojournalists, but unfortunately not all of them have a say in the full story. But with me being an independent, I sort of have that privilege, and I feel that is, you know, that is something to live for, and that is something to continue doing. Not to mention that it is, at the end of the day, what I enjoy the most. I mean, I studied pharmacy until I continue to study pharmacy, but photojournalism has been, photography in general, I mean, has been, you know, my main passion since it was a hobby since 2004, and shifting to news, you know, photography, and then shifting slightly back to documentary, it's all been very, very humbling, and it's all been, you know, a bigger means to understand the situation in Egypt more, and hopefully try to make others understand. I get sometimes, you know, comments like, "I didn't care much about the people in Rabaa until I saw your pictures," or "The Christians in Bula bombing deserved it, but when I saw the mothers mourning in your images, I changed my mind." And these things really do, at the end of the day, make me, you know, add more reasons and give me more, you know, motivation for this.
Okay.
So
Thank
I
you.
hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you. So, Basil, apart from, you know, continuing with high-risk professions, apart from any external factors inside the media profession, inside media itself, how has media changed or shifted or developed since the first uprising 3 years ago?
So the media has gone in a lot of different directions since then, and I think it's important to stress the importance of the media in Egypt. There isn't a lot of freedom of information here. There isn't information readily available to a lot of citizens, and the government tends to communicate to the rest of the population through the media. There's a massive state media apparatus, and there's a wide variety of sort of privately owned outlets. And because of the illiteracy rate discussed earlier, television media has a very critical role as well. And so sort of where we find ourselves now in the media is since the uprising on January 25th, 2011, you know, we're right now seeing unprecedented crackdowns on kind of the media and press freedom and so on. And we saw this as early as July 3rd when General Sisi announced Morsi's ouster. Minutes after, a wide range of Islamist channels that supported Morsi were abruptly shut down Some of their journalists were detained briefly, and those channels haven't come back. You have Masr 25, which is the Brotherhood's channel, and the list goes on. And the rest of the media, the rest of the mainstream media has sort of almost immediately at the drop of a dime fallen in line with kind of the current narrative that's being promoted by the government and the powers that be. Overnight, all of a sudden, you had these banners that we saw in English on channels saying Egypt is fighting terrorism. You had one of the private channels on TV had an alternate channel in which you could watch the programming dubbed in English as sort of a way for them to sort of communicate to the outside world sort of a justification for some of the things that were going on. So sort of, we've seen over the last 3 years, it's always been a battle of narratives. And a lot of the narratives maybe don't have much in common with maybe the reality or what we're currently seeing. And now we're just seeing sort of, in terms of the mainstream media, a very one-sided narrative that's sort of bolstered by a lot of conspiracy theories and conspiracies. I think there's a very popular way of thinking now, which is sort of, if you're not with us, not only are you against us, but you're conspiring with everyone else who isn't with us, against us. So you have that in terms of, I think a classic example is during Morsi's time, he also had trouble with the media, and some of the media was very much against him, some was very, very much with him. At that point, he used to lash out a lot at the media, and I remember there were very violent clashes outside the Muslim Brotherhood headquarters in March, I believe, of last year. And at that moment, sort of Morsi's reaction was to come out with a statement essentially blaming the media for sort of stirring up the unrest and creating this sort of chaos. Well, now that most of the mainstream media have sort of fallen in line with this regime, they have in turn sort of use that same sort of defense mechanism against the foreign media. You have the foreign media, which isn't under the same kind of pressures and control that maybe some of the more domestic actors are. And you have, you have government officials openly sort of criticizing very strongly on sort of uncalled terms, different media outlets claiming that, certain outlets based in the UK maybe are owned by Qatar, and sort of the promotion of these rumors that sort of promote this idea of there's this grand conspiracy aimed at bringing down the state. And that affects journalism, in such a strong way, because if you don't, all of a sudden, if you're a member of the press and you don't promote that same narrative, and you're in the country, you're under certain pressures, and you're volleyed with certain, accusations and things like this. I think Sarah, for example, she mentioned, the tense scenes that can be, in certain areas where there's a bombing or a protest or something like that. I, for example, on January 25th, 2014, I was with a colleague in Tahrir Square, and we were interviewing people, but because of, the way that the media is seen, and sort of definitely not mainstream media, is seen with distrust, we were approached, asked where we worked. They hadn't heard of it, so they decided we work for Al Jazeera, which at this point in time is very much male-aligned inside the country, and it's demonized on a lot of levels. So I ran into a lot of trouble because of that. And at the same time, you have a lot of journalists that are paying sort of the heavy price for this crackdown. You have the Al Jazeera trial with 20 defendants. A lot of them are in absentia, but you still have a group of them who are currently in jail and standing trial on terrorism-related charges. A lot of it sort of relating to talking to members of the Muslim Brotherhood is how it's being explained. And as a journalist working in Egypt, this presents as a very serious problem, because it's a sort of a signal that, if we communicate with the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a very important side of explaining the story of what's happening now, we can be prosecuted or charged accordingly. And at the same time, you have You have journalists who are in jail but haven't stood trial. Abajora Shamy was arrested during the dispersal of Rafik. He's been in jail since for over 200 days, and he has not faced formal charges. They just keep renewing his detention. You have two journalists from Rust, which is sort of a brotherhood-affiliated outlet, and you have these two journalists now that are going to stand military trial. And again, sort of when you look at this new constitution, there are articles on the freedom of the press and protecting journalists under certain circumstances. But when you can kind of rack up charges against journalists and civilians that result in military trials, then it shows how sort of the system that's been put in place can be manipulated accordingly to kind of crack down on journalists if need be. I think Egypt for a while now has sort of missed reliable, independent, and objective state media, and mainstream media for that sense. I think hopefully we can move in the direction of sort of making progress there. And I think personally, from my perspective, I saw some progress maybe before July 3rd. But the crackdown we're seeing now, I think, has undone a lot of the progress. And I think there needs to be a focus on not only giving the press freedom, but promoting an environment in which, the media isn't used to just drive agendas and promote conspiracies. We have anyone familiar with the Egyptian media in any sense knows there's a lot of citing sources for outrageous stories that a lot of times are not only untrue, but impossible. So, there needs to be a move away from that. We see headlines all the time, the US or this country or this group is funding the Muslim Brotherhood, who's plotting to do X, Y, and Z. And it's things that, as a journalist, I know are untrue. And really a lot of people should know are untrue. But, like I said before, the media has played such a central role here. And there's very few ways to get any sort of information any other way, that we've sort of kind of been here in a system in which there's just a lot of, the way you get information relies very much on how this state decides to spin it when they're disseminating this information. So, I think that's the state of media now, which I think, similar to photojournalism, is a little bleak. But I don't know. I still hope that maybe one day we can move more towards sort of independent and objective media.
Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to open the floor to questions. Sir?
My question is for Sarah.
Sorry, could you just let us know who you are when you ask the question? Thank you.
Yes, my name is Greg F. Tandilian with the Center for National Policy. My question is for Sarah. There's been a lot of anecdotes for the past 3 years about the issue of personal security for ordinary citizens in Egypt. In other words, particularly in the big cities of Cairo and Alexandria. And I'm wondering, does that lead then to some people then wanting a sort of so-called strongman to then put down all of this violence or potential violence against the ordinary citizen? How much does that play into perhaps some of these polls or whatever? Thank you.
Definitely, the general sense of insecurity feeds into the general sense of fear and the want of and the desire to have security at any cost. What you care at the most is your own security. You going to work, going shopping, taking your family out, visiting family members, because as there are clashes, you could get caught into clashes, but you could just decide not to go out or to avoid certain areas, say during Fridays or during major protests, and just avoid it and have your own life. And a lot of people can do this. I, as a journalist, I can switch off and decide to stay in my neighborhood for the day and forget this is happening. What I'm worried about, why I say my family is worried about, is is, are we getting on the road, on the highway, or getting stopped? Will our car be, are we getting robbed at gunpoint? Is anything going to happen to us? In some areas there are concerns about kidnappings, and you want the government to take action. Some citizens would acknowledge that the government is deliberately not taking action and would have resentment against the government for this. But the minute there is some sort of security, some sort of order in their neighborhoods, they're fine, and they want more, and that would lead to, again, accepting anything, like, because it's your basic need. You cannot go to work, you cannot make money, you cannot get food or you cannot get an education or go to the hospital if your route there is not safe, and then you can accept anything. Does that answer your question, or? All right.
Okay. Thank you. I believe you were next over on the side.
Hi, my name is Nancy O'Kale. I'm from the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy. Thank you so much for putting this panel together, because I mean it's really interesting, and I think a photo of this panel would make a better advertising for the Constitution than the one that was made by the army for the last one. And this is particularly about the issue of people's impression and how they are willing to go beyond what they see in the current circumstances and the polarization. So looking at Mohammad and Sarah, I mean, like, you both, I mean, would be positioned in a vulnerable perception for society. I mean, they would look at you and see.
I'm scary a bit, I know.
Like, yeah, they would say they can just tag you as the extremist Islamist, and Sarah, you would be tagged as the infidel. I mean, like, unveiled or everything. So how far do you see that society is able to go beyond this appearance in your field, in your interaction, to see far more than that and able to interact with you in a more in-depth way? Thank you.
Okay, do you want to take that first?
I would take like 2 minutes to speak about the movement that I found, which is the Salafyo Costa movement. Salafyo Costa movement was found due to a discrimination accident that I witnessed, actually. I work in the IT field for the past like 11 years, and I was a country manager for a Kuwaiti IT company in one of the African countries. And then after the revolution, I decided to go back and be based in Cairo. I had high hopes and high dreams, and most of them were personalized, were for the sake of the discrimination that I'm facing, for the way I look, and for what I believe in. So what happened is I'm new to the headquarters in Cairo, so I called the administration. I told her, please ask the guys to meet me at Costa, which is a famous British coffee chain, like the Starbucks you have. I'm not sure if there's Costa here or not, unfortunately. I'm not feeling home, actually. So the problem is that the young lady was like, no, I'm not gonna tell the team to meet you at Costa. And it's like, why? We are busy and we need to meet at Costa so that I'll be very close to the headquarters, or to another meeting. We were preparing for a very important meeting. And she looked at me and she was like, you guys, you Salafists, you don't sit at Costa? Do you want to tell me that you drink coffee like us and you like eat cheesecake and you like, I was like, yes. I was like, and she decided to no, and she didn't call the guys, and I had to call the team by myself. But I was so angry, and I decided to make a group called Salafyo Costa, which means in Arabic the Salafists, so sit at Costa. And I invited this young lady only to the group, and I invited our colleagues just to make fun of the young lady. And then, and what happened is I had this second thought: what if that she's not the only one? And then we decided to invite people. And currently, the group has like 30,000 members, and we have a fan page of 250,000 fans, which is disturbing a bit. We found out that the people have lots of stereotypes between each other, and we decided, to create some sort of homogeneous dialogues between each other. And we said, fine, we can sit at fancy rooms, speak nicely about each other. We are peaceful. We come in peace. Please, guys, don't stereotype us, and please give us a chance to express, which was not enough. People are still stereotyping each other. At that time, we had these clashes, and sadly, churches were burned at like May or April 2011. So we decided to invite Christians, Orthodox, inside the group, and we decided to create some sort of dialogue, virtual dialogue, which was not enough. I met a guy in the street, and people were saying, "Okay, guys, you are the terrorists, you're burning the church," and so on. And I met one Christian guy. We became friends later on, which is Basim Vector. And I told him, "Basim, we need to do something against this, because at the end of the day, it's the same country, and we have to live together. We don't have to love each other, by the way, because it's something we cannot deal with, but we have to find a way to live together." And Basim, the very typical Orthodox guy, who's like, "Okay, let's make this interfaith dialogue and come." I said, "This is not working for the past 30 years when you bring a priest and a scholar or the sheikh and they started kissing each other, saying everything is fine, nothing is there is no conflict, and you guys are dreaming." And I said, "No, we're not going to do the same." And he's like, "So what we going to do?" And I was like, "Let's play football." And we created the first Christian Salafi football game, and it was a draw, unfortunately. It was 6-6. But can you imagine, the excitement that we had scored 12 goals in one match? It was like a crusade. It's like people were decided to win the game. The thing is, we decided to choose football because it's the national sport in Egypt, and in a football, you will find everything. You will find all the human expressions. You will find people sad, happy, be angry, swearing, hitting, kicking, everything in a football. And then they had coffee, and then at the end of the match, you said, "Oh, they are normal humans. They're like us, And that's what we decided to do, to have unclassical ways of exchanging, getting to know each other. I was subject to another discrimination accident in 2003. My wife wears a niqab, which is a stereotype, of course. And then we decided to go to Hurghada, which is, again, is the stereotype that we don't go to Hurghada. Hurghada is a city 30 kilometers away from Cairo. It's in the Red Sea, and it's a lovely place. After driving for 75 kilometers, I was stopped by a police checkpoint, and they asked me to go back. And I was raised in this human rights, family that, it's my right to use the road and blah, blah, blah. And the officer was laughing hysterically. He's like, "Human rights?" And he's like, "You have to go back." And I went back, actually. And I had to go back, and my wife was sad. We were scared, so many armed people around the car. It was not that comfortable. But I decided to go to another road because I had a target which is making my wife happy. And then I took another road, a bit dangerous road, a mountain road, and she's not a very good company in long drives. She slept. And then she woke up before Hurghada by like 30 kilometers. And, they like surrounded the car. I was like, "How did you come here?" I was like, "By car." And then I was subject to investigation for like 30 minutes. And then they took my ID, and I was subject to another investigation for like 3 to 4 hours in the headquarters of National Security. And they asked me to leave Hurghada, and I left the second day. That was in 2003. The first thing I did after the revolution is taking my wife to Hurghada. And that was so personalized. I do believe that we are approaching, if we speak about what we're facing at the moment, lots of stereotypes, lots of clashes. But I do believe that we have these doors if we decided to leave the classical way of dialoguing in fancy and comfortable rooms and go to the people. What we do is we make like convoys, which is we bring doctors, and one condition is that the doctors should be from mixed ideologies and mixed faiths. So we bring a Salafi doctor and a Christian doctor, a liberal leftist doctors, to go and serve the people, which usually the villages had clashes between Muslims and Christians. So the guys receiving the service would be surprised about the mix, and even we enforce this, or we create this environment for the people or the doctors to get to know each other, which is, if somebody was caught in Rab'a, was caught in like the massacre in Maspero, everything, they will go for, I know the guy, I know what happened, and this non-classical way of getting to know the other party, I guess it is working. It will work, hopefully.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for the panelists and the Atlantic Council to invite you guys. Just a quick question for Sarah. Sarah, what do you think about the Egyptian residents who happen to be Shiites, but within the unrest, they started to identify themselves as the Egyptian Shia, and they're non-Iranian, of course, they're just Egyptian. What do you think they should do as the residents of Egypt and their security? And the question for you, sir, of course, you have done the same route with the Christians of Egypt, but have you guys considered the same things with the, as again, non-governmental Shias who are again Egyptian? Thank you.
Well, religious minorities in general have always been like the victim when it comes to political clash, and we've seen it twice. We've seen it in June, actually, in the week leading up to June 30. 4 Shia citizens were in a house. They were like together with each other having dinner or praying, and citizens in a certain village basically surrounded them and eventually dragged them out and killed them. And then again, in a much lesser scale, months later, under the military, the celebrations of Shia were prevented, and another prominent Shia activist was arrested, and I think he was sentenced with contempt of religion. It's I cannot advise on a certain policy or a certain approach to things. It would be foolish of me to actually claim such knowledge or wisdom. All I can say is that they have been, religious minorities across the board have been vilified and are the first victims in any conflict, because it's easy to pick on the smaller guy, the less voiced. It's easy to say, to put them in the image or in the context of conspiring against the nation with whoever powers you decide to associate them with, and also used in a different way, also used in you could say that when the killings happened under Morsi, everyone blamed the Salafis and the rhetoric that they use and the incitement, but everyone also ignored their own sectarianism in terms of how they addressed the Sunni Shia issue. And the same people, a lot of the people that had criticized that or lashed out against that under Morsi were silent about the prevention of Shia activists from celebrations that are very normal to Egypt and have been going on for years and decades before that. Unfortunately, I don't have a solution for that right now or any sort of wise advice.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can we just ask people to keep their questions brief and the panelists to keep their answers for 2 minutes? Kent.
Next time.
Hi, Kent Davis-Packard, Council on Foreign Relations Fellow and Visiting Fellow at the Saban Center for Middle East Policy. This is a question for our journalists in Cairo. We are seeing a lot of headlines about the terrorist attacks on police officers and soldiers, and then we see a line in the media saying authorities blame the Muslim Brotherhood. Meanwhile, at the same time, we see another line that says that Ansar Bayt al-Makdis and the Muslim Brotherhood both condemn these attacks. So, and then you don't see a lot of follow-up from journalists or any analysis. So I'm wondering, perhaps the answer is obvious, but could you please describe how journalists are approaching these types of stories?
Thank you. Which journalist?
Photojournalists, or I guess anyone could answer on the panel, but
okay, so
maybe we could turn to Cairo first.
Both like to take that very briefly.
I think you can. Dealing, especially when it comes to these sort of attacks in which police officers and armed personnel are being killed, these are very sensitive sort of situations to report on for security concerns, and of course, in terms of trying to reach perpetrators, you run into a lot of the same problems in terms of, there are certain people that maybe you're best off for certain your own safety, not dealing with directly, but sort of, I think when we see, like you said, the government blames the Brotherhood for a certain attack. I think there was an attack very recently, I think last week, in which the government released a statement almost immediately blaming the Muslim Brotherhood. And I think this sort of, this is an issue that sort of the media has as well, in that sort of, there's been a history here going before the revolution, all that, of sort of transparent and conclusive investigations from the government side. When that happens, I think there's a loss of trust from the general public when something comes out like this in terms of who to blame, who to believe, and that sort of thing. You know, in a place where a lot of this is happening in Sinai, it's very difficult to report from there at this point in time. You know, it's become sort of a pretty violent place, and the army has control over certain areas, and you know, it's been very difficult to get information out of Sinai, and that's just one of sort of the challenges we have. I think the problem comes in terms of journalists or maybe certain media outlets in Egypt taking it upon themselves to fill in the blanks with little to no real information. And that's how I think a lot of the kind of these false conclusions are come to. And it's how sort of certain beliefs in terms of maybe the Brotherhood's alleged involvement in certain attacks, it's how these beliefs and conspiracies and sort of, you know, baseless accusations sort of then cross over into becoming truths when you have you know, certain media outlets that sort of just take something as fact that they themselves don't look into and that, you know, isn't really questioned in terms of sort of the mainstream media sense.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Tatiana Sharif Saint-Louis from the National Endowment for Democracy. And my question are twofold and go for all of the panelists here. One is regarded to local journalism. And since you know, the revolution started, we have seen a lot of citizen journalism grow and social media becoming kind of a replacement for news and sharing information. And I'd like to hear, based on like your experience as journalist in the field, going outside the cores like Cairo, Alex, Port Said, where we know we have lots of tensions, but where more in Upper Egypt or, you know, Delta regions, where we have communities where we see more and more increasing local journalism occurring and trying to formulate itself professionally. And I'd like to just hear your observations and what you see, what future roles such kind of initiatives can play, and activists who are engaged in local journalism. And my second question is more for the social activist, civil society. Where have they matured in the last 3 years in terms of being able to encompass challenges that, you know, the state is facing? And we are seeing, of course, you know, the monopolization of power again. And do we see civil society activists that also have grown in very much informally, especially as informal structures? Is there, what is the observation or, you know, your take on their role in the future, you know, to play a role in promoting these, you know, the values of democracy and what they, you know, were out for in the first place, and for economic rights and social justice. Yeah, and just I'd like to hear from, you know, all of you what your take is on that. These two things.
I'll briefly comment on the local journalism, and maybe then Mosaab or Basil can provide more information. There is a growing movement of local journalists. First of all, social media allows more voices to emerge, and for us journalists, if I'm based in Cairo, to reach out to more, to know, to get to someone there faster than possible, and to actually have a network of validation and to question the background of that person and assess their credibility right away. But social media alone is not, it's not the voice. It's actually a tool by which other people could, in which other activists, local journalists could influence mainstream media. Because at the end of the day, people will watch TV. Not everyone will have Twitter or Facebook. And a lot have managed to use that well to get to influence mainstream media. Local journalists suffer the most. They don't have accreditation. They work on their own. It's their own initiatives, but they are more aware of all the problems that people have in their own communities, and they convey that to more people. And it's actually the job of our job, or more like the people, the journalists based in the center, in the capital, to try to reach out to them and give them a bigger platform, more tools, and more and a way into the general public. And a lot of initiatives are working on that and supporting local journalists. But maybe Mosaab or Basil can give you more information about the difficulties that is.
Okay. Mosaab, if we can do it in 2 minutes.
No, I don't really have much to add on this. I mean, the thing with citizen journalists is, like Sarah said, they're a great source, but many times we've had so much problems with having to rely on their reporting solely. I mean, it was very useful for a certain period, and it continues to be, but it also added a lot of more challenges, trying to verify, trying to check the accuracy, and especially that citizen journalists will almost always be a protester, so he will almost always be driven by the atmosphere and the beliefs he stands with, and many times this has caused him a lot of false news or over exaggerated stories to happen, just because people have solely relied on this. I think unless citizen journalism is added to the greater image and sort of passes through the journalistic side, the professional and objective side, it becomes largely either an underreported or an exaggerated story.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to comment, to mix the two comments in 2 minutes between the social and the civil society work and the local journalism. Actually, most of our activities are in the south, which is in Said, and basically in a city called Qina. There is this center called Dishna. Dishna is, a sub-city or a smaller village, or it's a center. So there is a journal called Dishna al-Yawm, which is Dishna Today. If you are not from Dishna, you'll understand nothing. If you can read this, it's very local journalism. It's very professional. Most of the journalists took their, were previously working at Al-Ahram Al-Akhbar, which is the national journals, but then they decided to give back to their community, which is this spirit that we need, which is giving back to the community, which is doing civil society. I would say that, yes, there are challenges in this civil society, but there's this very famous debate that whether we should provide the things that the government should provide, or no, we should provide a minimum, and then, it's a very long debate, but again, the people are suffering. So what we do at Salafyo Costa is we do 3 things, basically. We provide the minimum service that should be provided so that the people can have the basic needs. And then we go pressuring the government to give these needs. And then after pressuring, this pressuring might be, a sit-in, might be a stand, a protest against these governmental institutions that are not providing the service. Then we sit for negotiation with these governments. So the government is not always evil, and then it's not always, the good side. I would say an enlightening story about the social media and how powerful it was. Like a few weeks ago, there was very, very sad accident of the people going hiking in St. Catherine. And there were 6 hikers there, and they were lost and they were dying. What happened is that the media, the mainstream media, decided to overlook or ignore this very sad accident. But then the social media decided to go there and making noise and help them. They are at this certain place and so on. And that's when the mainstream media decided to look after this. And that's when the military decided to move its tanks to save 3 out of 6. it is not that great, but this, I would compare this to an accident that happened during Mubarak in 2006, where was this ferry holding like 1,100 passengers, and they all died because they simply decided to ignore this because we were celebrating the African National Cup. So this is something new that the social media is moving, is doing something. The paramedia might be the alternative of the mainstream media.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Danya Greenfield, Acting Director of the Rafik Hariri Center. Welcome to both of you here and to our friends in Cairo. Sarah, I wanted to return actually to a point that you made at the very beginning about the disconnect of perception about how Egyptians feel and how much support there is for Sisi at this point. And also the point that you mentioned, Mohammed, about the disconnect between sort of the capital and what's happening outside the capital among sort of average Egyptians and this disconnect. I'm wondering to what extent there is potential for movements to emerge to galvanize this silent majority or silent plurality, even if it's 45%, that's still a substantial proportion. But as you noted, they're apathetic and silent and therefore not represented within the mix at this point. To what extent are there grassroots movements that could develop to tap into that, specifically outside of Cairo and elsewhere? And if that's not a great potential at this point, given the polarization, what do you think it would take in order to activate that silent majority or silent plurality to be more engaged?
Okay, right. That's a difficult question. Everyone's trying to answer that now. It's like if you take the work of any political party anywhere, what they need is a network. They need to build a network. They need to reach out to everyone. They need some sort of media presence that works in parallel with their work on the ground, and to gradually form a network that based on some social beliefs and political beliefs, and that would translate into votes and influencing the government later on. How is that possible? Now, I have no idea. Theoretically, there is room for that. Theoretically, there are people that could be swayed. Like we have the prime example between the Constitution in 2012 and Constitution in 2014. Basically, in 2012, it was a vote for the Muslim Brotherhood. In 2014, was a vote for their adversary, it's the military. It's around, again, it was less than 40% that voted in each. I assume it's the same 40%. I don't think they were entirely replaced by some other 40% that sat out on either one of them. So yes, they were swayed, they were convinced by something else, and they completely changed their mind a year and a half in between. How, there's definitely, the government has its media reach. It uses the media as an outlet. It's a huge, it's the best way. Some of the presidential campaigns of other candidates capitalized on media rather than one-on-one work or groundwork. So without the media, there isn't much room if you don't have some sort of way into the media, and then at least one of your biggest tools is a sideline or out of service for now. Politically, yes, you can go out and talk to the people if you can manage and get some sort of a connection between their own demands, what their own grievances that Mohammed here talked about. Then yes, you can translate that into politics. Whether people will be allowed the space to do that or not, to actually get something from the ground, a grassroots movement that could be influential politically on the long term, I don't know. We'll have to figure out in the next year or two.
Okay, thank you. All right, one final question over there. Two final questions, one and then, but fast, everybody.
Okay. First of all, thanks for the Atlantic Council for organizing this event. My name is Khalid Minshaw from the Egyptian Embassy. My first question is a follow-up question for what Kent has asked about the attacks that are taking place in Egypt. I would like to ask one of the journalists, since they are working on the ground, whether the some members of the Muslim Brotherhood had adopted violence or not, and whether this is justified or not. The second question is to Mohammad Tolba, and first of all, I highly appreciate your work, and I would like to ask you about your assessment about how the this constitution had been drafted comparing to the constitution of 2012, and whether there is a consensus on this constitution comparing to 2012 or not. Thank you.
Okay, really, really fast. Basil, would you like to take the first question?
I guess in terms of the first question, in terms of whether members of the Muslim Brotherhood have been involved in violence, you know, I'm not a spokesman for the Brotherhood, but on official terms, they've renounced violence. At the same time, you know, there have been certain situations where low-level members are implicated to an extent, and whether this is out of function of being a member of the Brotherhood or in their capacity outside of that, you know, that's hard to tell. And I think a lot of things, you know, something I brought up before, that really makes it difficult to really judge all of this is kind of the trouble we've had with sort of transparent and conclusive investigations. A lot of times we'll hear about something that happens, and you know, from that point, it becomes more and more difficult to follow. Information isn't as easily found, and you know, so in terms of Brotherhood members being involved in violence, I'm sure that's been the case in some cases. Whether it's in their capacity or within the framework of the Muslim Brotherhood, that would be a completely different issue. That really we haven't seen anything conclusive that would indicate that there's some sort of orders or hierarchy ordering these attacks. You have this group Ansar Beit al-Maqdis, based in Sinai, who has claimed responsibility for attacks, who has released videos of them carrying out, you know, various attacks. They released a video showing them attempting to assassinate the interior minister. So a group like that is obviously aiming at sort of destabilizing the country and attacking the security apparatus. But in terms of any sort of ties between the Brotherhood and Ansar Beit al-Maqdis, all we have are, once again, these reports that we keep on seeing, citing unnamed or anonymous sources that really don't use conclusive information to back up these claims in terms of where the funding's coming from or how it was started. So until we come across something like that, it's very difficult, at least for me as a member of the media, to draw that line when it's not there. When that line is there, if it's ever there, then we can sort of discuss you know, the Brotherhood as an organization and their involvement in these sort of things. But at least from my perspective, we haven't seen that.
If I may add, I think from experience on Fridays, which is the day of protest in Egypt, that throughout the past, mainly after Rabaa, as many have seen, that the levels of violence have increased, and this has pushed a high number of protesters, especially among the youth, to become more violent. Many have picked up weapons, and it has become sort of a common sight for the Friday protests to be violent from both sides. Obviously, the level of arming and violence is by no means equal, but there is tendency now to drop the silmiya, the peaceful means, and we've seen, you know, there has been videos and pictures of protesters carrying shotguns or basic means to attack the police, and this is what makes specific places on Friday, like Ain Shams, for example, or Matariya, see very high level of casualties.
Thank you.
Okay, very fast. I will try to mix between the two answers. I would say that, yes, the constitution of the recent constitution is much more better than the previous one, definitely. It does not achieve our high hopes for, you know, freedom of speech, and again, the constitution is not our battle from my own point of view. the constitution will still be ink on papers, and if the people don't believe in the constitution, don't respect the constitution. And to reach this respect, we need like years and years to have the people binding to constitution. I would say that in 2012, we tried to gather the people from different ideologies and beliefs, and we went for a hearing session by the Muslim Brotherhood writing a constitution. And we had like 45 demands. None of them were the Sharia. We tried to put aside the things that are in conflict, but the group that went were mixed ideologically, were like people, I wouldn't say that beliefs only, because we had Nubians inside the constitution. I would say minorities. So we tried to push for fighting discrimination and making discrimination as a crime, which the current terms don't make it as a crime. Actually, they heard us for like 1.5 hours, and because our name is Salafyo Costa, so they put us on the Islamists' name. And we consider Islamists as a discriminating issue, because there is nothing called Islamist. There is Muslim and non-Muslim. I don't understand what is Islamist. Anyways, so we decided to reply back, choosing us in the Islamist day by making our spokesman an Orthodox. So the guy were like, they were panicking, and are you sure that you came in the right time? And it's like, yes. And we spoke like Egyptians, and that's the point. There are initiatives, but you have to pick your battle and pick your fight, because we are so limited in terms of resources and in terms of concentration. So we pick our battle, and I would say that if every group would decide which battle to fight, we will achieve something at the end of the road.
Thank you. All right. Okay. All right. Then thank you so much to everyone for joining us. If anyone, we're going to have to leave, but if anyone has any questions, our panelists are with us for a little bit. If anyone wants to come up and ask questions, and again, Associate Editor Nancy is over at the right if you want to check about EgyptSource. Thank you for joining.